Another thing on people's mind is the Iran situation, and a lot of journalists, a lot of experts on this field are talking about how this is a strategic move to kind of like help China, who has also been one of the main um, um, markets for Iranian oil, and also who was affected by the strait being closed. So a lot of people are saying Trump has an agenda in terms of Iran. He wants to pressure China into making a statement and taking a side so that they together, United States and China, can pressure Iran to be able to open the strait so that ships can go through. Just recently, a Chinese ship was a vessel was shot at. So um, I'm sure his administration is going to make the case that it is in China's best interest for the strait to be open because a lot of Chinese goods has to get to the rest of the world. And should the strait be closed, not just Iran suffers, China suffers as well because they are losing on their markets and the prices are good. So I think that's the case that the administration is going to be making with regards to Iran. What are your thoughts?
I mean, if you know China, you know China is not in the business of pressuring other countries.
Right.
China has a very contrary idea in terms of intervention. I'm not saying China does not influence, but China does not intervene overtly in that way. And if you know China, you will know that they will not overtly influence or intervene in a sovereign state so openly as the Americans would do. A good example is how China dealt with the Russia-Ukraine war. He had a lot of China had a lot of leverage over Russia.
Mm-hmm.
Russia is still here and doing what it's doing thanks to the support that China is providing by continuing to buy Russian petrochemicals and oil and buy products, continuing to buy food and fertilizers from Russia. That is what China does. By the way, China needs these things, right? So it's impossible for China to say that no, we are not. We are going to side with Ukraine or we are going to side with Russia so overtly. China was also doing business with Ukraine
No.
to a certain extent, right? So China has its own interest. And if China's interest is to buy, China is going to buy oil from whoever they want. And they've made this very clear. China does not only buy from Russia, they buy from Iran, they buy from Saudi Arabia, they buy from the Gulf states, right? So how do you expect China to pick a side and say, okay, now I'm going to pressure Iran into agreeing to terms of an agreement that are not favorable to Iran? China does not play that game. I'm sure you would agree. China does not play that game. Yes, China might have some sort of leverage, and yes, China might really be in need of oil, not dire needs. China has a very large reserve of oil and gas that they can use for the next couple of months. So China is in no rush to have this business closed, right? But however, they still, rather than depleting their stockpiles, I believe they would want to continue to import. So yes, China has an interest in this war ending so that business can continue as usual. But again, what role is China going to play to ensure that this war ends? China is just going to be a mediator. I think China can play a mediator role without picking a side, without picking America or going against Russia. They are just going to say, hey, you two need to come together and have a conversation. If there's something that we can do to facilitate this conversation, to facilitate this mediation, we will. Not people, analysts have said that Pakistan is in the position of mediator because because China kind of instigated and brought Pakistan in, as opposed to China doing the work. They would have Pakistan play the mediator role because Pakistan is friends to both Iran and the United States, so they can be trusted, right? So they pick the best person to do the job and they provide support in the background. Um, Another thing too, which I would like to kind of mention, is that though the Strait of Hormuz is you would say close or control, Chinese ships are still going through. I read um, somewhere, I forgot to bookmark that page, that about 10 Chinese tankers went through the Strait of Hormuz today,
Mhm.
right? Which means, you know, China, which means Iran is still letting these tankers go through, which means, um, oil is still kind of getting out and flowing to China, not to the extent that it did 3 4 months ago, but it's still trickling out, right? Um, the analysts too have also said that Donald Trump is in a position of weakness
Mhm.
in this visit because they failed they failed to exert control over Iran. For example, if the Iranian government had collapsed on the first couple of days, and if they had put in place a government that was favorable to the United States, then the United States goes to China and say, "Hey, we have Venezuela, where they have total control of Venezuelan oil. It's not going to China." Venezuela oil goes directly to the United States. So China has lost that supplier. Imagine that Iran too, which is a big supplier of Chinese oil. Imagine that they had a government that was favorable to the United States, and that the United States could say, okay, we, China, Iran, and us are not going to be selling any more oil to China, and that this oil will be diverted to the United States and maybe diverted to other countries, right? Then China would be in some sort of a desperate position where they've lost their supplier Venezuela, they've lost Iran as a supplier, which means a significant portion of their import is gone. Now they are forced to negotiate with whoever has control of that oil. Now it's the United States. Unfortunately, that did not go as planned. And if you notice, this trip was scheduled to happen in
So earlier.
earlier in April. And in my opinion, they were going to attack end of February, take a week, a couple of days, have their regime change,
And it
set
ends
up
up
a
in
new government, and then Trump goes to China with all the cards in his hands and say, "Hey, man, we have control of the Strait of Hormuz, we have control of Iranian oil, we have control of Venezuelan oil. Hey, what do you want to do?" Right? We can starve you, we can choke you. If they wanted to do even more, they could say, "Well, we can put a blockade on the Strait of Malacca," right? And then China would be stranded. They would have no supplies, they would have no routes, and Russia will not be able to provide as much oil as China needs. In my opinion, that was a game plan. So they moved the date a few weeks down the road, hoping that by now they would have dealt with Iran and then go to China with all the cards in their hands. Unfortunately, that did not go as planned. So Donald Trump goes to China.
in a
Um,
position,
sorry,
in a weakened position.
he goes to China in a very weakened position, and that is my opinion. Another thing too, maybe I'll let you comment before I add something else. I wanted to add another point, but I'll let you.
I don't know. We don't know the ins and outs of all the military planning and the strategy of the US and Israel in
No, so
that.
I think because we are not part of the American government, we're not part of we do,
Yeah,
but we talk about the things that we see.
yeah,
Because at the end of the day, what you see tells you exactly what is happening. You don't need to be part of the planning. You don't need to have the briefings that Donald Trump has. But if you see the way he operates and you see the way things, why did they postpone the visit in the first place? I think that's a good question to ask. Why?
yeah. Well,
Because the war was not going as planned.
no, not necessarily because he thought it was a time his country is in the middle of a war and they needed his presence to be
They
able
are
to.
still in the middle of the war. Why is he going?
But the world is in a different phase. So
Exactly the point I'm trying to make. At that time, at least now he can say, "Well, we are not exchanging fires. We have a ceasefire that is fragile, but it's still there, and we are negotiating." Compare this phase of the war to the phase of the war April, what was it? April 2nd.
Yeah.
It's not the same thing.
It's not the same. So, well,
Right.
all this is speculations. We don't really know.
Of course.
But
Of course.
yeah,
We
it may very well be that it was they were hopeful that when he went to China, that would have been a different strategy. But it is what it is.
exactly.
Um, they're going to talk and whatever. China is going to make its position clear, as would the U.S. Excuse me. Yeah. No. Yeah. That's it. You're going to bring something up.
I was going to talk about China's leverage,
Yeah.
because China at this point seems to have the upper hand in whatever negotiations that is going to happen. Like I
Hmm.
kind of explained earlier, the Iran strategy is completely failed. That
Hmm.
is not something that Trump is able to use. Venezuela is not big enough. It's not big enough leverage for China in terms of supply, oil supply. Venezuela supplied, I don't know, 7% of oil to China. So it's not big enough to be a leverage in that sense, right? Another thing which I wanted to kind of bring up was um also the fact that with everything that's going on in the Gulf, the United States has moved assets from Japan, South Korea down to the Gulf because they are dealing with Iran. What
Hmm.
does that leaves South Korea, Japan, and those parts of Pacific Asia? It leaves them vulnerable and open, right? Taiwan, take the Taiwan situation. Do you think if China were to attack Taiwan today, do you think the United States would be able to defend Taiwan? I mean, as appropriately as they would
Yeah.
5 months ago. Do
Hmm.
you think that will happen? So the United States is in a position where um, they don't have, just like Donald Trump told Zelensky, they don't have the cards. They
Hmm.
don't have the cards in Taiwan. They don't have the cards in Japan and South Korea because they moved assets down to the Gulf. They don't have the cards in Iran because Iran is spinning them down there and nothing seems to be happening. So in terms of leverage, what leverage does America have in this negotiation? Again, that would be the question that I would ask you.
Yeah. Well, they still remain. I know you think they're a dying empire. They still remain the number one economy in the world. World trade is still happening in the American dollar. The America is still technologically, in many ways, advanced military-wise. In many ways, more advanced than China. I mean, China is a respectable country military-wise, but I think the United States has an edge. So, um, I think that
They
is
have
what
an edge militarily,
I
and
think.
and Iran is stuck in their throat.
Because Iran is a tricky situation.
It's not tricky. Iran is a third. Iran is a third tier military power, maybe even fourth tier military power,
Well,
and the
like
United States is stuck with Iran.
I don't know.
So how do you compare the military capacity of Iran and that of China? You mean the United States cannot deal with Iran, and it's almost 2 months, 3 months, 2 months plus?
I mean, the fight now is really the straight. That's really what the fight is all about now. So, it's not dealing in the sense that you go and bomb everybody. No, it's dealing in a strategic sense where you target people who are supposed to be targeted. You focus on key infrastructure. So, in many ways, it's more complicated than you're trying to put it. Um, Letting access to the Strait of Hormuz is also a complicated issue. It became more important and significant as the war went on. So
And I mean, considering that before the 28th of February, I'm
it
sure
was
very few people knew anything about it. I knew about the Strait of Hormuz, but it meant nothing in the bigger
meant
scheme of the big scheme of things, right? So now the Strait of Hormuz now is everything. Something that was almost insignificant a couple of months ago.
months
America
ago.
made the Strait of Hormuz what it is today. That is
Mhm.
America's fault.
It's also Iran's fault. I know you don't want to blame Iran, but it's also Iran's fault because they are trying to choke the war. they are trying to choke China too. They are using it as a leverage, not just in America, but on the world. I mean, Canada has nothing to do with this, but you can tell me what the price of gas is in Canada. Africa has nothing to do with it. You can tell me the cost of gas in Africa. These are just their sole purpose is to go down and bring everybody with them. And I mean, just as a simple question: who wants it closed? Who wants it open? I think that's an eye opener question.
Iran
Um,
wants it open.
are you sure?
Iran wants it open. Yes.
I don't think
All,
that's
all,
what.
all, all, all we need to do to have the Strait open is America to move their vessels out of the Gulf, and then the
Uh,
Strait of Hormuz becomes open. Well, you would have to pay a toll to go
uh-huh.
through it, yes, but yeah, it will be open for business.
Yeah.
America needs to move. That's it.
Yes.
So I
Well,
asked you the question: who wants the Strait open?